Story 1, Mercenaries, Playground of Destruction. It was like Grand Theft Auto in North Korea. You could hijack anything, destroy any building, and call in airstrikes. Truly ahead of its time. I never could beat the final mission, though. Regardless, it was amazing. Story 2, Sacrifice. I do not remember a lot of buzz about it. It is one of the most imaginative real-time strategy titles in history. Came out in late 2000, and I do not think there has been a game like it. Unlike most real-time strategy titles, it played like a third-person role-playing game instead of a top-down isometric game. You personally controlled a unit. You would summon creatures and cast spells, getting into direct combat with the opponent. The goal was to corrupt the altar of the enemy. You play a wizard in service of one of a pantheon of gods. The campaign is well told and imaginative. You show up after a catastrophe destroyed your reality, one that you might have caused, in some ethereal realm, and the gods there try to seduce you to their side. Every mission, you can choose to serve the same god or a different one, gaining new spells and summons each time. You essentially build your repertoire this way, similar to a role-playing game, since you keep your old selections. As war breaks out between the gods and they start dividing into factions, your options close off until you are left serving the last god standing against a horrific foe. It has some great voice acting. Tim Curry plays this god of air who constantly insults the earth god. The game's visuals are insane, the world crafted using voxels that could show massive terrain destruction. One of the spells would transform a huge area of the map into a volcano and rain down massive flaming boulders that would break massive holes in the ground. Sadly, it sold pretty poorly. It was ambitious, funny, and ahead of its time. The user interface really hurt the game. It is pretty awkward to play. Story 3, Edit. I didn't expect this to generate such intense reactions. Good job, guys. If you want a good overview of this game, watch the Mathematosis video about it on YouTube. He's the one that got me into it. Story 4. For me, it has to be an old Xbox game called Metal Arms. It's a bit old now, but it's the best. They were going to do a sequel, but the company was bought out or went bust or something. Story 5. Screen Cheat. It's a split-screen multiplayer game that you play online. Every character is invisible, and the only way you can kill each other is by looking at each other's perspective, hence, Screen Cheat. There are also some really funny additions to the game, such as a mode where every sound is replaced with an Australian-going bugger. Cheap and hilarious. Story 6. My summer car is like a car driving simulator that takes place in 1990s Finland. You build your car, and in the meantime, you do silly things, driving around and interacting with all the drunk men on the map. You can get drunk too. Kind of a trashy game, but still fun. Story 7. Champions of Norath on PlayStation 2. Been waiting for a remake forever. Loved it more than Baldur's Gate. Deadly Alliance. My wife and I must have played that game and its sequel for 100 hours. Also, no love for Armored Core series either. Damn. When I wasn't killing vampires in a black pit in Champions, I would destroy mechs in a parking garage. Story 8. Brave Fencer Musashi for the PlayStation 1. Never expected this comment to do so well, but thanks to everyone who commented and made me feel validated for my love of this game. Good memories. Story 9. Kenshire. Is a kind of messed up dystopian game that takes place in some barren wasteland. Not your typical high-budget titles. More for PC and independent. Lower budget. But as a gaming experience, I think it captures the very essence of what an organic gaming experience should be. The game itself presents a bleak scenario and places you in the middle of it. Rise or fall, it almost feels like it's up to fate. But the interesting aspect is that your character gets stronger with repetition. So as long as you're alive, you've got a chance. Even if you're bleeding, limbless, and crawling long distances while starving. A scenario all too common in Kenshire. Story 10. Jeanne d'Arc on the PlayStation Portable was fantastic. I hoped for a sequel or at least another game from the developers. It's honestly the only reason I haven't sold my PlayStation Portable. Story 11. There is a game I just recently heard of and immediately got on Switch. It's still quite new and definitely has more than a few bugs. But its concept is so cool and the game itself is beautiful. It's called Pine, and the concept is that you are a human in a world where humans never made it to the top of the food chain. There are 6 main species on the island, including the humans, and basically everyone is stronger, smarter, and more well-established than you and your people. One of the coolest things about the game is that it has an always-changing sort of political status among the different species. If you ally with the Fexels, then the litters will hate you because they hate the Fexels. You can join in fights, or you can try to watch from a distance as a Carablin gatherer gets into a fight with a Gobbledoo gatherer. There's a main quest to follow, some puzzles, resource gathering, crafting, and combat. It has elements that remind me of Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, but it does still have plenty of bugs and kinks to work out. The game developers seem to be active, one especially in the subreddit for the game, and take people's concerns very seriously so the game can run smoothly. Edited to add, hey, so I see a wide mix of responses to this and a lot of people saying the game disappointed them. That's fine, and I get that, especially if you played it right at release and not after the main patches like I did. I really enjoy the game despite the bugs I've encountered personally, but I totally understand if other people don't. I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking it's some perfect game, but I truly enjoy the concept, and I'm willing to put up with the minor annoyances of the lagging and whatnot in order to play. If you give it a try, I hope you enjoy it. If you don't, then I'm sorry I led you astray. Story 12. Star Siege Tribes came out in either 1998 or 1999 and was one of the first games to use projectiles and mid-air combat. The base game itself was pretty awesome, but what made it incredible was the extensive modding community. Full-fledged role-playing games with unique textures, maps, and non-player characters. The game is pretty much inactive now, but it still has a few active people and servers. It might be nostalgia, but what an incredible game and player base. Edit. If you want to check out an updated version of Tribes, look at the Midair subreddit or Tribes 1 itself at the Play T1 website. It looks like it's still pretty active. Story 13. I've talked about this game before, but I think it's very underrated for such an amazing game. Back in 2003, Bethesda came out with a role-playing game called Pirates of the Caribbean. The game is not at all connected with the film series, aside from a few names here and there. Basically, it was a pretty large world full of islands that you could explore as this guy named Nathaniel Hawke. You could choose what kind of pirate you wanted to be based on your actions. You could be a smuggler, a trader, a bloodthirsty swordsman, and more. They gave you skill points as you leveled up to put into things that would help you become the character you wanted to be. You could hire crews for your ships that would also fight at your side as you explored the islands and at sea. On the islands, there were dungeons and caverns to explore where you would fight skeletons and get treasures and really great weapons. The ship battles were fun, but they also gave you the option of avoiding them or doing them in a less involved way if that was not your thing. These battles would either be with other pirates or a country that you were not friendly with at the moment, because diplomacy also played a major role in your character. There were quite a few ships you could choose from too, and if you were a smuggler or trader, you would rely on these ships to move cargo from one island to the other. There was a main story of sorts, but it was a pretty open world filled with side quests that allowed you to do your own thing. My biggest complaint was that the controls were a bit clunky, but you got used to them. I loved that game very much and revisit it every few years, but not a lot of people I know have ever played it or even heard about it. Story 14. Shelter and Shelter 2. Simultaneously the most relaxing and stressful games I've ever played. So gorgeous, and the soundtrack is stunning. They're honestly works of art. Edit. I also forgot to mention Shelter 3 is coming out soon, and this one follows a herd of elephants, and I'm so excited. Story 15. Golden Sun and Golden Sun. The Lost Age. 2 of the best role-playing games I have ever played, and they need to make another one for the Nintendo Switch. Please make it happen, Nintendo. Story 16. Bay 11 Hall A. It's a pretty darn chill game set in the future where you play as a bartender and mix drinks. The gameplay is quite simple, and the characters are pretty interesting. That, and Xenosaga 1 through 3 and Ace Combat 3 through 7. Story 17. I love Japanese role-playing games, and this was one of the first from a property I actually recognized and could relate to. The playable characters are original. and the story aligns with the films, bringing in many nostalgic fights. I recently did a playthrough of that game on an old PlayStation 2. It still holds up. Story 18. I know that a lot of people still play it on personal computers, but no mainstream war first-person shooter has ever truly delivered like PlanetSide. A very large battle, shifting fronts, real sneak attacks, infrastructure, drop ships, tanks, aircraft, open fields, cramped bases, actual long-range snipers, you name it. You actually took territory, and it was all persistent, not just the same 5 capture points but hundreds. There was no better experience than fending off an unorganized wave attack with a team of good, communicating players. Every time I see a new Battlefield, Call of Duty, or whatever, it's still not going to touch it. It might look better and play smoother, but it won't capture that experience. I love feeling that cog in the machine feeling. Story 19. Super Robot War. For some reason, it just never picked up steam nor became mainstream in America. But if you like turn-based tactics games, a high degree of stats customization, multiple game paths, and friggin' kick-ass mechas, you need to check this out. Story 20. Spy Party has to be the most unique game that I have ever played, since the gameplay is completely asymmetrical. The spy and sniper are playing 2 completely different games, but it is incredibly well-balanced, and the more you play, the deeper the psychology gets. Sadly, the player base is tiny. Everyone should try this game so I have more people to play with. Story 21. Gauntlet Dark Legacy. I played this game for PlayStation 2 when I was a kid and spent many hours playing but never beat it. I found it a couple of years ago while shopping at a gaming store, so I bought, replayed, and finally beat the game. The satisfaction was wonderful. Story 22. Crosscode 2018. A game from a Western developer that's a sort of throwback to Super Nintendo Entertainment System-era action Japanese role-playing games like A Link to the Past. The gameplay is solid. There are a number of elaborate dungeons to play through, and the story is wonderful. It's on Steam, but there's also apparently a Switch port in the works. Story 23. For people who liked Undertale and those kinds of meta, fourth-wall-breaking role-playing games, there was this little game called One Shot that came out around 2014, and it was magnificent. It's on Steam now, but it doesn't function the same way because they wouldn't be allowed to. The original version, if you can find it, is genuinely one shot, in that you have to follow the directions closely and make sure you're satisfied with the difficult decisions you're presented with, because you literally can't go back and redo anything. It's the first role-playing game I played where the player actually is themselves, and simply communicates with the main character through the game, complete with sneaky messages passed back and forth and antagonists reaching out to mess with the player. It's truly a hidden gem, and I will sing its praises whenever I can. Story 24. Hoo boy, I think I'm way late to this party, and no one will see my nomination, but here goes. Battle Right. It's similar to Defense of the Ancients 2 and League of Legends, except each game is distilled down to pure player versus player action. Without the often boring early game of those twos creep or minion last-hitting farming phase. You are never in the situation where at the 15 to 20 minutes mark your enemies have already clearly snowballed and won, yet they still toy with you 40 minutes more, like a cat with its mouse. Also, each spell is a skill shot and they can all be dodged with WASD movement. And with certain heroes, you can even reflect spells back to your enemies. Even their ultimates. Pretty fun. As you can imagine, all of this means that the skill ceiling is pretty high. Some people claim that it's a bit harder for a new player to really feel like they get the hang of it. I don't quite remember because my first game was a long time ago. But nowadays, especially with matchmaking finding you other new players, I guess it cannot be too bad. You'll see how you fare after a few matches. They are not long either, around 10 minutes each. I recommend 5 to 10 games, and that might be enough to get the basics. That's like 2 to 3 Defense of the Ancients games. It's also free to play on Steam, so you can try it without hassle or remorse. I hope I see you in the arena. Yes. That reminds me, some people also liken it to World of Warcraft's player versus player arena. Without having to farm for good player versus player gear, of course. Story 25. Pyre by Supergiant Games is probably their least played title, but it is not only my favorite. It might be one of my favorite games ever. The art direction and character design are world-class. The story is unique and inventive. Not to mention the game doesn't end if you lose, but the story changes. The gameplay is weird but fun. But the best thing about it is the music. The music is the best I've ever heard in a video game, as every character gets their own theme, and the game ends with a song that is personalized to what you did in the game. I cannot recommend it enough. It is a truly beautiful artistic experience. Story 26. Skies of Arcadia. It ticks most of the early 2000s Japanese role-playing game boxes, but does so in a pretty unique way. It's bright, optimistic, and fun in ways that set it apart from its fellows. Story 27. Eternal Darkness for the GameCube. It is essentially a horror-action role-playing game which has you play multiple characters over millennia. What really makes it great, though, is that it messes with you as your character starts to go insane. Bugs crawl on the screen, you hallucinate becoming a zombie, and so on. But the absolute best part was when it put up a fake blue screen of death. I nearly jumped out of my seat, realized what it had done, and just had to say, "Bravo, developers.